Thank you so much. Thank you, Dante, and thanks to everybody who has agreed to be a precinct leader, part of the organization that is going to deliver success 1 week from tonight for this campaign and propel us through the country and onto the nomination. Thanks to Ed and everybody in the Democratic Party here for standing up for our values. Well, thanks for making me feel right at home. You always throw me for a loop with the names of the communities here because they rhyme with the ones in Indiana. We got a North Liberty right down the road from my home in South Bend in St. Joe County, Indiana. I was in Knoxville recently. We got a Knox, but it's in Stark County. We got a Knox County, but that's on the other end of the state. Now, the Knoxville here is in Marion County. We got a town of Marion, but that's in Grant County. And then Marion County is where Indianapolis is. So I've learned to check my notes carefully to make sure I am where I think I am. But I think I am in North Liberty, and I know I am very glad to be here. We have been campaigning through the state of Iowa for more than a year now, and I've been reflecting on this last year and 3 days or so since we opened up the exploratory committee that became this campaign. We had 4 people on staff. We had an office about as big as this stage where I'm standing. We had no national name recognition, a personal fortune of literally thousands of dollars. But we had this idea that a different kind of voice was needed in order to move this country forward. That big, bold ideas and unity for our party and country could go together. And that this country would be well served if we could start to get Washington to run a little more like our best run cities and towns rather than the other way around. And that has brought us to this point. It's brought us to this point where the same voters and caucus goers that I was talking to a few months ago, starting to show up, checking out our events, at the end saying things like, "You seem pretty good, you're in my top 7, we'll see how you do." Now it's decision time. And that's why I'm here one more time to ask you to caucus for me on February 3rd and to explain why I'm asking for your support. And to understand why we're doing this in the first place, I want to begin by inviting you to form in your mind the image that guides everything we do on this campaign. It's the image of how it'll feel that first time that the sun comes up over North Liberty and Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. The sooner the better, right? Wouldn't it be nice to put that kind of chaos behind us? Wouldn't it be nice to put the tweets behind us? And yet, that day is going to be a challenging day for us. It's not the day that our problems end. It's actually the day that our work begins. The reason that day is the controlling image of this campaign is because that day we will wake up and ask, now what? That's right. We can make it so much better, and this is our chance. Because on that day, our country is going to be divided. We're going to be more worn out and exhausted and torn up from politics even than we are right now. Which means we're going to need a president focused on unifying and healing the American people. But that won't be enough. Because think about the challenges our country will be facing on that day. On that day, the sun will come up in a climate this close to the point of no return, crying out for action on what is the global security threat of our time, which is what climate change ought to be treated as here in the country and around the world. This will still be a country where people spouting white nationalism and white supremacy feel emboldened and empowered, and we will have to stamp that out, not just from our politics, but from every part of our society that will be crying out for action on that day. On that day, the sun's going to come up over an economy where, even as this president tells us everything's great because the Dow Jones is looking good, awful lot of people are having to take on a gig and a second and a third job just to hold on to what they've got. The sun's going to be coming up over schools where kids are getting active shooter trainings before they are old enough to know how to read. That's what our country is going to be up against, crying out for action, and that's why we will need not only to unify the country, but to have a president ready to take the big, bold, meaningful steps in order to get that done. That's what I'm running to be. On television, I have seen some saying that this is no time to take a risk. Others saying this is no time for small ideas. And I agree. But the smallest idea is the idea that we can't come together around solutions. And the biggest risk would be to follow the same tired Washington mentality that brought us to this point. It's time for something new. And that's what we have to offer. In other words, I'm running for this office because I believe the presidency has a purpose. That the purpose of the presidency is not the glorification of the president. It is the empowerment and the unification of the American people to do big things. That's why I'm asking you to caucus for me on February 3rd. And everywhere I go, I'm meeting Democrats ready to bring about that change. I'm meeting independents ready to bring about that change. And I'm even meeting quite a few what I like to call future former Republicans who are equally enthusiastic about bringing about that change. So let's grow this movement, because you are welcome here if you're ready to stand with us and bring those changes. Not only are most Americans ready to have a better president than one we've got today, but there is an even bigger majority around the things that we are for than around the things that we are against. A powerful American majority that is ready to make sure that in this country, giant corporations are taxed more, not less, than middle-class families. Ready to make sure that this becomes a country where your race has no bearing on your health or your wealth or your life expectancy or your relationship with law enforcement. Ready for a head of environmental protection who believes in climate science and protecting the environment. Ready for a Secretary of Education who believes in public education and supports our teachers. Ready to make sure that we enhance American freedom by ensuring that government keeps out of things like dictating to women what their reproductive health care choices ought to be. But also insisting that the public sector steps up to solve problems like making sure that there is no longer such thing as an uninsured American when it comes to our health care. We could do that together. This is our opportunity to engage that American majority, to galvanize and not polarize the American people to get those big things done. It's not just because of the values that we share. It's because we know that politics isn't about who got the best zinger off on television. It is not about who looked good on cable today. It's about our lives. That's how Chasten and I think about politics because it shaped our lives. It was kind of a tough day in my family. It was a year ago today that we lost my father. And when he became ill, I will never forget the conversation that we had at the hospital with the social worker, politely explaining to my mother that if he needed long-term care, the best option for her might be to spend down everything she's got until she's got so little that she would qualify for Medicaid. And asking myself, is that how long-term care works in the United States of America? And for far too many of us, the answer has been yes. But I also think about the fact that during those tough last weeks, we were able to focus on what was right for him medically because he had Medicare. And that's why I want to make sure every American gets that kind of excellent coverage. This is personal. Every decision that is made in those big white buildings in Washington matters because it finds its way into our lives, into our workplaces, into our homes, and our doctor's offices, and our marriages. I'm standing in front of you as somebody whose marriage exists by the grace of a single vote on the United States Supreme Court. These big issues that get debated, war and peace, talked about on television, matters because it matters for somebody every day. I was in touch recently with someone I was training with when we were getting ready for our deployment. And we were thinking back to the day that we shipped out, right after the time to say goodbye to families. And he and I were walking after he'd hugged his wife and kids goodbye, and his little 1.5-year-old was toddling behind him, not understanding why his father was walking away as we made our way back to the barracks. And it took all the strength my friend had in his entire self not to turn around and look one more time at his little boy, not understanding why he didn't turn around and pick him up. And that happens by the thousands every time an American service member is asked to deploy into harm's way. That is why our service members and their families deserve a president who understands the stakes of going into international conflict and won't let it happen if it can be avoided. And that means saying no more to a president who pretended he was injured in order to avoid serving when it was his turn, and now minimizes the injuries of those who did serve and were in harm's way. No more of that, because this is personal. And as Chasten and I think about what it will be like to form a family and to raise children, we want to make sure that we're raising children in a country that is actually going to be able to create a good future for them, where they will know nothing of the threat of school shootings, where they will not look over their shoulders to ask whether our generation created a climate that they could live in and thrive in. That they would know that they could live in a society, an American experience, defined not by exclusion, but by belonging. That's what we have the opportunity to do. And it starts right here. It starts by expanding our understanding of what is possible and acknowledging that we don't have to choose between governing well and winning big. We don't have to choose between unity and boldness. We cannot do any of those things unless we do all of those things. And we've got to think big at a time like this. Now, the amazing thing about Iowa is that you all have a way of letting the rest of the country know what is possible. First time I ever set foot in this state was as a campaign volunteer 12 years ago, knocking on doors for a senator from Illinois that a lot of folks weren't sure had a real shot. And I was here the day that you changed what America thought was possible when it came to our presidential candidates. I was watching on TV when Iowa gave me permission to believe that I too might one day have an opportunity to wear this wedding ring that I got on my hand right now. That's thanks to you. So a week from today, when you're going to the caucuses, might be right here in this school, depending on your precinct location, I'm asking you one more time to send a message to the rest of this country about what is possible and to make history together with this campaign. That's why I'm asking for your support. So, our numbers have grown a little bit since those first days when I was popping into the coffee shops and backyards. But I still think no matter how big of a room we're in, we ought to be able to have some kind of conversation. So, we have gathered up questions, written them down on note cards as you were coming in. They're in the famous fish bowl. And I'd like you one more time to welcome someone who's going to be your voice, our campaign organizer, Ruby Goldberg. By the way, I know I'm a little biased, but don't we have the best, nicest, most energetic organizers and staff on this campaign?
This is from Natasha B., and she asks, how do you plan to recruit teachers to public education?
Great question. And Natasha, if you're here, give a wave and a holler so I can be looking in the right direction. I'll find you. All right. If anybody finds Natasha, let me know. So, we got a problem. There is now, for the first time ever, a majority of teachers saying they would hesitate to encourage their kids to follow in their footsteps, when this is one of the most important professions in all of society. And I'm not just saying that because I married a teacher, although he certainly gives me an education about education every day. We have got to recruit and retain and support a new generation of teachers and the teachers who have been doing such good work. Our educators carry the future in their hands. So there are a lot of complex things that need to happen in American education policy, but some of them are very, very simple, like we need to pay teachers more so that more of them are encouraged to go into the profession. You know what's amazing to me? When I'm talking to teachers around Iowa, even more than I hear about pay, one of the biggest issues I hear is about support for educators to be able to do their work, including support on mental health. It's why we need to make sure that we are supporting educators with mental health first aid training. But that's not enough either, because what good is it to train teachers in mental health if they have nowhere to refer a student to when they identify a challenge? It's why we got to lift up the whole system. It's why we've got to invest in more providers, and in particular, more providers who can support our youth. It's why we've got to break the silence so a teenager knows that it is as okay to talk about facing a challenge with depression or anxiety or symptoms of something serious like bipolar disorder or another challenge, that should be just as normal as talking about any kind of physical medical condition. It ought to be as normal to see psychological support as it is to see a school nurse. And we ought to put our money where our mouth is when we say that we believe in parity for mental health care and addiction support. That's a way to support teachers. We've also got to build up the profession, supporting things like the Education Access Corps that I am proposing to encourage teachers to go into teaching in Title I schools. Those schools serving those most in need, and that's why we've got to massively increase the dollars going to those schools federally. We got to make sure that we're supporting all of our teachers. Yes, building up STEM, because we're going into what some are calling the new machine age, but also remembering that we're not just educating future workers, we're educating citizens, we're educating future parents and voters, where social and emotional learning are going to be critical, and civics and humanities and arts education are not a luxury, they're a necessity. So the bottom line is, if we can honor our teachers a little more like we do our soldiers, and compensate our teachers a little more like we do our doctors, this country will be a better place for all of us.
This is from Todd. As a veteran, would you be open to retroactive application of lifetime VA benefits?
Great question. Again, Todd, if you're here, give a wave or a shout. So this is so important because there are a lot of veterans who have earned well, first of all, every veteran has earned the support of the people of the United States of America, and that doesn't end when you take off the uniform. That obligation lasts a lifetime. Now, to get to the heart of the question, part of what's going on is the veterans sometimes encounter bureaucracy, they encounter obstacles, or they have discharges, sometimes over a mental or behavioral health issue that was itself a consequence of something that happened to them while they were serving. See, we're still learning as a society to do a better job of understanding what veterans are up against. And I want to say in particular a word to those who are from a different generation than mine, because frankly, by the time I came home, our country had done a reasonably good job of figuring out how to separate the way we feel about our troops from the way we feel about the policies that sent them into conflict. Other generations didn't get that benefit. And so to folks who belong to the Vietnam generation, for example, better late than never, I want to say thank you and welcome home. So we got to make sure that our benefits and our policies reflect that. And that means that if somebody has a service-connected challenge, we've got to make sure that they are protected and that they are supported and that they have everything they need by way of care and by way of benefits. And we've got to make sure that the way we support our veterans isn't just in terms of health care. It isn't just in terms of the system. It's our communities, welcoming back those who served and making sure that they are integrated into the lives of our communities. And part of that's something we got to do better out of Washington, D.C., but part of that's something we can encourage right here at home and engage local communities that want to go a little further than just saying thank you for your service.
This question is from Cindy, and she asks, how can you bring more mental health resources and workers into lower populated areas like rural Iowa?
So important. Cindy, is that you? Great, thanks for coming. And what you're talking about is one of the most important things that we're not hearing much about in the healthcare debate. All the sizzle on television is about Medicare for all who want it versus Medicare for all versus the other visions for insurance and who's got the better plan. Of course, I think I've got the better plan. But there's more to this than just insurance. We've got a problem with providers. What good does it do to have insurance that'll cover your health care issues, even your mental health care issues, if you can't find a provider who can see you for 6 months? And that is especially a problem in rural areas. I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding. So folks have faced this challenge, which is why we need, first of all, reimbursement rates that are higher, that show our regard for this profession and encourage more people to go into it. Thanks for your work on that. We need a system that is ensuring that people can get seen for what they need with specialty care, in-person care, and telepsychiatry when that can make a difference. Although that only works if you got broadband, so it's part of why we got to make sure everybody's online. It's why we've got to, in my view, when we're talking about things like student loan relief connected to public service, we got to count being a rural mental health provider as public service, whether you're working in the public sector or not, because it's a kind of service that we very badly need. And one last thing, my plan includes what we call healing and belonging grants. This is federal dollars going to local plans that communities put together in order to make sure they're supporting the overall mental health of their population, because it's going to look different in different areas, and that's okay. I don't think all of the answers have to come down the same from Washington, but I think more of the money should. And that's the idea of these healing and belonging grants going into the community where rural areas can do what's best for them.
This is from Nancy. What are you doing to earn the African American vote?
All right. Nancy here? Well, First of all, I am very proud to have the support not only of African American elected officials from my own community, but some phenomenal leaders here in Iowa. I'm so proud to have Mayor Quentin Hart from Waterloo supporting us. I'm so proud to have Representative Deb Berry from the Cedar Valley supporting us. And we're making sure we get that message out to folks who, frankly, have some very good reasons to be skeptical of politicians, even Democrats, or perhaps especially Democrats who have been viewed as taking African American votes for granted. At a time when the black experience in America is different for so many in health, in economics, the ability to get a job, the ability to get credit for small business, not to mention the fact that we have racially motivated voter suppression changing political outcomes that affect everybody. It's why we need a 21st Century Voting Rights Act in the United States saying that kind of voter suppression cannot stand. It's about tackling a criminal legal system that is still not delivering justice in so many racially disparate ways, and tearing down walls of mistrust between communities of color and the police departments sworn to keep them safe. We have put forward what we call the Douglas Plan, Frederick Douglass Plan, the idea that it should be as ambitious as the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe, but this time investing right here at home to tear down systemic racism in all its forms. And we should not expect this only to be an issue for candidates of color to talk about, or only an issue for voters of color to care about. There's no question that no one suffers more from our system and the discrimination in it than those who are directly discriminated against. But there's also no question that our entire country is diminished as long as these inequalities persist. And so when I'm reaching out to skeptical voters, the biggest thing I'm trying to get across is that I will make sure this is not a specialty issue, but a national commitment to fix what is broken. Because if we don't, we will see these forces of inequity and white supremacy wreck the American project in our time. Instead, let it be written of our time that this is when we finally wrangled those forces down and made this a more equal life for everybody.
This is from Will, who's 11 years old. How will I afford to get insulin when I'm older?
Wow. How old?
11.
11. Are you here, Will? Hey, Will. How you doing? Good. Thanks for coming. So I'm impressed that you're thinking into the future, but I'm also a little bit embarrassed that this is something you have to worry about. This shouldn't be your problem. You should be able to focus on being 11 without ever having to wonder whether you're growing up in a system that will take care of your medical needs. And it is an embarrassment on behalf of everybody old enough to vote that we haven't fixed this. So I want to make sure when I'm president that we do, so that by the time you are old enough to vote, you can be worrying about something else. It's why I support legislation to keep the cost of insulin down. It's why we're going to enforce against companies that increase the prices on things that we need, sometimes in order to live, not because they have to, but because they can. There will be enforcement when that happens when I am president. It's why we're going to actually allow Medicare to negotiate the prices for critically needed medication and therapy. Negotiate so we get a better deal for Americans, no matter what insurance plan you're on. And it's why we're going to have an out-of-pocket cap so that if you can't afford ordinarily medication, we're taking care of you completely, and no matter your income level, it never goes above a certain cap every month that is very affordable for any individual or family. So we're going to take care of you and free you up to solve the next generation's problems by the time you're in charge, all right? Thanks for being here.
elected, how will you help Planned Parenthood? We have been struggling in Iowa.
So let's start at the beginning. Part of American freedom is women's freedom to make their own reproductive decisions. Now, that freedom doesn't really exist if we don't also make sure that there is funding for low-income women to be able to access those services, which is part of what Planned Parenthood does. And so we're going to reverse things like the Title I gag rule that attack Planned Parenthood at the core, and we're going to make sure that we cover the full range of medical care, including reproductive health care and abortion services that people need. And as I said to a voter asking about this last night who had a different perspective, I come from a place where a lot of people have different perspectives on this issue, and I get it. And at the end of the day, if we can't agree on where to draw a line, a deep, complex moral decision that each of us forms our conscience about, then let's agree on who should be drawing the line, and I trust women to make the right decision about where that line should be drawn. Planned Parenthood is part of that.
This is our last question, and it's from Jacob. And he asks, what teacher in school had the biggest impact for you?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Jacob here? All right. So it's hard to pick just one. There was Mrs. Chismar. We had a class in economics when I was in high school. And she believed in her kids more than I think we believed in ourselves. And was cheering us on at every step. And to this day is involved in this campaign, has helped a generation of students understand what they could do. I think of the English teacher who blew my mind when I realized that Robert Frost's poem, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry that I could not travel both and be one traveler, there I stood, and spoiler alert, he takes the road less traveled by. And I was 11 or 12 and suddenly realized it wasn't about a couple of roads in a forest. It was about the decisions we make in life and what they mean for the rest of our lives. Blew my mind. I think of Mrs. Lewis. I was about 3 years old in a preschool, which is part of why I understand the imperative of making sure that early childhood education, pre-kindergarten, is available and affordable to everybody, because it gave me a great start in life. She had this way. Mrs. Lewis, I can picture her today. If you ever got in trouble, she needs you to do something, she would say the word automatically in a way that made you do it. She'd say, Peter, I want you to put those toys away and put on your coat automatically. And as soon as she said that, you just snapped to attention. It was amazing. Wouldn't be here if it weren't for the educators who shaped me. Who among us would? And, of course, probably the teacher who has the most influence in my life is the one I married. Because I've seen him up late at night grading papers. I've seen him dip into his own bank account, well, our bank account, in order to provide supplies and build up his classroom. I've seen him having conversations with parents and taking on board not just the intellectual formation, but the well-being of his students. And I see our teachers doing that all the time. It's one of so many reasons why we need to stand with teachers, and I promise to the teachers who feel like your job is being automated away by over-reliance on standardized testing, I promise the teachers who feel like you are being asked to shoulder everything from becoming a mental health expert to turning into a highly trained armed guard if there's a physical safety threat, I promise to the teachers who just want to know that the President of the United States has your back, when I am in the Oval Office, you will have both a teacher in the East Wing and a president in the West Wing determined to make sure that you succeed. All right, is that it? All right. One more big thank you to Ruby for being your voice and guiding our conversation. And a big thank you to all of you again for being part of this. Let me just share a couple last thoughts with you as you're getting ready for decision time. I think a lot of folks are just thinking, you Democrats all look pretty good. I want the one who can win. Wouldn't it be a good idea to go up against this president with somebody who actually lives in a middle-class neighborhood in the industrial Midwest and can call out the ways that he's turned his back on farmers and consumers and workers in our part of the country? Would it not be a good idea maybe to nominate somebody who can stand up and say, as a believer, that it is all the more important to insist that God does not belong to a political party in the United States of America? Wouldn't it be a good idea to have somebody who could talk to this president about the real meaning of service and keeping this country safe? And biggest of all, wouldn't it be a good idea to have somebody who knows how to challenge and confront and call out this president, but at the end of the day knows that this campaign is not about him or about me, it's about you, and we're going to deny him the power to change the subject, because the less we talk about him, the more we talk about you. Doesn't that seem like a good idea by way of political strategy? Iowa, I hope you understand why I am asking you to support me, and if you already do, and I see precinct leaders here with those big buttons, give a wave if you're one of our precinct captains or team leaders. If you want to know more, find one of them and ask how to get involved, because these next 7 days are going to be remembered in history for the result and the trajectory that they lead to when it comes to the nomination and therefore the presidency and therefore the trajectory of our country and world. No pressure, Iowa, but it's on. Here we go. And one last thought. I think that this is a season to bring the idea of hope back into style in American politics, because you can't do anything without it. I know that this is a bleak moment, and I know why we haven't been talking about hope quite as much with everything that we're up against as a country right now. But I would also argue to you that running for office is an act of hope, that's why they took the word hopeful, turned it into a noun, and used it as another word for candidate. Did you notice that on the news? I'm a 2020 hopeful. That's what I'm doing here. How fitting! Because running is an act of hope, and so is volunteering, supporting a candidate, so is caucusing, and so is voting. So can I look to you to spread the sense of hope that is needed in order to get people on their feet and bring about change? And are you ready to bring about that sunrise I talked about when we turn the page and put this administration in the rearview mirror? And are you ready to make history with me and change what Americans think is possible 1 week from tonight, beginning right here at this high school? Iowa, I think you're going to make me the next president of the United States, and when you do, I will work every day to make you proud and make us proud of what we did in 2020. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Let's go out there and get this done. Thank you. Thank you.